to go through on our behalf, and we're kind of reminded that with Paul as we go through the book of Acts. He went through a lot to spread the gospel, and we thank you for him also. We ask you to bless this time and to give us some insight and understanding, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we finished chapter 26 last week, and just to catch you up, right at the end of 26, Festus had called in Agrippa, who was Herod Agrippa II. Covered all that last week, and Agrippa heard him out. And at the end of, when he heard everything Paul had to say, and Paul had already appealed to go to Caesar, Supreme Court, if you want to put it in modern day terms, this is what the last statement that we have coming out of Agrippa, and it's verse 32 in chapter 26. Then said Agrippa unto Festus, this man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar. After hearing him out, he's the king over Judea, and I really believe Agrippa would have said, Paul, there's nothing to hold you for. You haven't done anything wrong, but you've already appealed to Caesar, so that's what we're going to do. All right, these last two chapters are, I have no idea how far we'll get today. But this is Paul's last trip. And the first three, we call them, they're called his missionary journeys. This isn't so much a missionary journey, seeing how he's a prisoner. But if you watch what he does, he's still spreading the gospel. He's serving God. And God just uses him right through to what we know to be the end of his life. I don't know if we have any official documentation, but you know what I've read, and at least I like the fact that they call it tradition, said that Paul was beheaded in Rome after the book of Acts is over. I don't know how long, but we don't know that for sure. So anyway, we'll pick up after Agrippa makes that statement that he might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed under Caesar. We'll pick up in chapter 27. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustus band. And remember, he's going to appeal. He appealed unto Caesar Augustus. So this is a centurion. Centurion is a captain over 100 men. But he must have some kind of tie to Caesar because he's of Augustus' band. So I'm kind of speculating. But apparently Caesar Augustus. Yeah, chapter 27, Judy. Just starting 27. Apparently Caesar, which would make sense, he's the emperor over the whole Roman Empire, would have a band of centurions, however many that is, and each one probably has their own area or responsibility. But anyway, here's a centurion called, his name is Julian, a centurion of Augustus' band, and entering into a ship of, anybody want to try to say that? Adramyttium. It's only in the Bible once, so that's as good as you're going to get out of me. Entering into ship of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia. And just a little side point, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. I don't know why that's mentioned because I don't believe his name comes up again. But anyway, their plan is, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia. So from where they're at in Caesarea, which is on the Mediterranean Sea, a little bit north and west of Jerusalem, their plan is to go up along what we would call Syria and across southern Turkey to kind of go by stay close to land, but they're in a ship sailing. That's the plan, to go sail by the coasts with an S of Asia. And the next day we touched in Sidon, which is just I didn't look and see the miles on it, but it's another Tyre and Sidon are north of Caesarea. So they got in the ship, went up to Sidon, 1 day journey. And keep this in mind, because I think we're gonna look at this a little bit later, but I'll just read through it right now. And Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go into his friends to refresh himself. Kind of unusual thing to do with a prisoner. And we'll just leave it there for now, because we're going to see some more of that. Maybe we'll kind of put them together when we get a little farther. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus. Cyprus. Come on, that's, boy. All right, well, you go up the coast, going north from Sidon, you come up to what back then was called Syria and Cilicia, make a turn, and Cyprus is a big island just off of that corner where the ocean comes up, curves around. Cyprus would be sitting down here, and what I'm doing with my hands is probably backwards to you because I'm looking at it from my point of view. And it's not really important anyway, but Cyprus is a huge island. They went up around Cyprus because the winds were contrary, so they couldn't quite take the route they wanted to. Remember back then, these were 100% wind-driven vessels, and they could do, I don't know if it's a side point and I'm chasing a rabbit, but I haven't spent much time on water at all in my whole life. But I talked to a guy a while back that there's a big sailboat race that goes from Chicago to Mackinac Island every year. And I talked to a guy that had done that a time or two, and he was and it sounded kind of cool, but he was telling me the things they can do with sails. They can almost sail the opposite direction the wind's blowing. That's with a lot of technology and stuff. I mean, this was a year ago when I talked to this guy. These sailing ships back then, they were bigger than the kind of boat he was talking about, not as maneuverable, made out of wood, heavy, but they could still control them with the sails to a certain degree. Now, when you have a wind-driven ship, you get to a point, and I don't know what that point is, depending on how your boat's set up. You get to a point, depending on the wind, where you just can't do what you want to do. And they're going to get into some of that, but in fact, they are right here. They sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. So they just couldn't do exactly what they wanted to do. So you got to be kind of flexible, don't you? If you're taking off in a ship, in a wind-driven ship, back in these days, you got to be a little flexible. If you got a definite plan and the wind says no, the wind's going to win. Verse 5, and when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, the city of Lycia. And if you want to go back and look at a map, these things are all on the map, but they don't do a lot there, so we won't spend a lot of time on it. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy. They're heading for Rome, and he put us therein. And when we had sailed slowly many days, must have been pretty calm, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering or not allowing us, here again, the wind isn't letting them do what they wanted to, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone. Now from verse 2 down to through verse 7, the Isle of Crete, they have traveled about 800 miles since they left Caesarea. And I don't know exactly what the time frame is. Now this is going to slow way down, and just reading through it, you wouldn't know it. And hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lycia. So the Isle of Crete, if you're familiar with it at all, and Crete is, just so I can explain it, bear with me. Okay, if you come across the southern border of what we would call Turkey today, there's the Aegean Sea that goes up, and on the west side of the Aegean Sea would be Greece. So down from the Aegean Sea out into the Mediterranean Sea, straight down is kind of it'd be between Turkey and Greece, and south out in the ocean is the Isle of Crete. Hardly passing through it, we came to a place which is called the Fair Havens, whereunto was the city of Lycia. Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. What does he mean by that? Any thoughts on that? It has to do with the time of year. They've already traveled 800 miles by ship, and some of it was slow going. We were told back a few verses back. The fast would be, and it doesn't say, the words in the Bible don't say this, but anything I looked at agreed that it would have been talking about the Day of Atonement, which would be mid-October. And he's just making a statement. He was using that for a time reference. And what he's going to say in the next few verses kind of confirms that. But he's saying, guys, it's bumping November now. Being out here is dangerous. The weather's turning bad, you know, just like here. We've had beautiful weather up till now, but we don't always. I remember in 1975, this has nothing to do with this, but I crossed the Mackinac Bridge the night the Edmund Fitzgerald sank. That was like the, 10th, 11th, or 12th of November. November isn't always friendly to sailing. That's the only point I'm trying to make. Paul understood that, and he was using that feast for a time frame where, you know, it's time to get off the water. So Paul admonished him. And he said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be only with hurt and with much damage, not only of the lading of the ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which are spoken of Paul. It's interesting. The centurion is the one calling the shots on the ship. Just something I noticed, because the owner, the master and the owner of the ship had to convince the centurion that we're going to keep going, not listen to Paul. And because the haven was not commodious, that means not well set or not convenient, it wasn't a good place to winter, the more part advised to depart thence also. Let's get out of here. This isn't a good place. Paul doesn't know what he's talking about. If by any means they might attain to Phoenicia, and there to winter. And that's not that far away from where they're at in Fair Havens. If you go along the southwest side of Crete, can't tell you how many miles, but it can't be over 80 to 100 miles. There's a better place. So the argument they're putting up makes sense, as long as the weather will allow them to. And there to winter, which is in haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and the northwest. Phoenicia is just about on the west tip, and if you're going to leave there, you're either going to go southwest or northwest if you take off straight. I believe that's all that means. I couldn't find anything contrary to that. And when the south wind blew softly, finally, we're getting some cooperation for a little bit. Supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. So they're hugging the shore, heading for Phoenicia. Now, in a sailing ship, but not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. Tempestuous means stormy, or what was the other word that they gave for that? Had to do like typhoonic type of wind that would cause a typhoon, called a Rockladam, which just means a storm from the east. I was talking to Wayne this morning, and east winds are normally not a pleasant wind. They're cold, they're wet. Even in the summertime when it's 85 degrees and you get an east wind, it might not be chilly because it's so hot, but it's a cooler type of wind. And it's not a very common direction for the wind to come from. So this was not unheard of, but not your typical wind. And when the ship was caught, verse 15, and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. We couldn't fight the wind, so we just, sometimes you can't control it. Let's just see where it's going to take us. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. And the boat is referring to the small boat on the side of the ship, which when they had taken up, they used helps. They were trying to get the boat up, and they used either cables or ropes, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. In other words, the wind just took us where it was going to take us. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship, and the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was taken away. They rode this storm for quite a while, long enough that they were just giving up hope. We've thrown everything out we could. We lighten the ship as much as we can. This thing just isn't letting up, and they're losing hope. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosened from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And I don't think he was rubbing it in their face, but he's trying to get their attention. He goes on to verse 22, and he says, And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. I don't know which one of the guys, there was 200 and, we'll get to it later, 276 people on that ship. I wonder which one of them, when Paul said to be of good cheer, I wonder which one first said, You got to be kidding. Who knows? There shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. And here's how I know that. For there stood by me this night an angel of God. Now, if he would have stopped right there, we would, I think, probably rightly suppose that it was an actual angel. But an angel means messenger. Here's the way he finishes that statement. There stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve. That narrows it down to who? Jesus Christ. Jesus appeared to Paul, and he doesn't say if it's a dream or not. I don't know, doesn't really matter, but he knew who he was. Jesus appeared to Paul, saying, Fear not, Paul. Thou must be brought before Caesar. Caesar's where? Rome. You're going to get there. And lo, God had given thee all them that sail with thee. Not only are you going to get there, but everybody on the boat's going to get there. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Now, we're not told if that comforted everybody. Don't know. Paul understood it. Paul believed it. Paul said, this is what God told me. Howbeit, we must be cast upon a certain island. In other words, It ain't going to be smooth sailing. It hasn't been so far, and it's not going to be for a good share of the rest of the time. In fact, we're going to be shipwrecked, cast upon a certain island. But when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, it's referring to I think it's called the Adrian Sea, one of the many names for it. About midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. And they sounded and found it 20 fathoms. Does anyone know, I've heard of it, but when somehow they bounce sound off the land and it comes back and they time it, know what the distance is? Anybody have any understanding how that works? I've just told you everything I knew. But that's how they measured distance from a boat to land, especially when they couldn't see it. Now I got to find my spot again. 28, right? They sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little farther, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. We're getting closer. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon the rocks, they cast forth anchors out of the stern. I love this. And wished for the day. Man, I wish the sun would come up so we can see what's going on. I can picture that. Try to put yourself in their shoes. They wished for the day. And as the shipmen here's the guys that run the boat. These are the sailors. Here's their reaction. As the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, we're getting out of here. You guys are on your own. When they had let down the boat, or they call it a skiff, that's on the side for going to land when you can't get close enough with a ship. When they had let down the boat into the sea under color, I don't know if that's how you pronounce that or not, but that's an outward showing. False pretenses, under color, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. They're letting this boat down, but they're pretending like they're putting more anchors down because they're going to get out of there. Paul said unto the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. You better keep them here. We're going to need them. The centurion, who just decided to go ahead and sail late in the season, contrary to what Paul told him, after everything that just happened, you think his confidence in Paul's getting a little better? I would think so. So when Paul told him, these guys got to stay in the ship or we're done for, then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So here's these guys trying to escape with the little ship, and when Paul talked to the centurion, he said, guys, they ain't leaving. Not unless they want to dive in. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. That's quite 14 days of riding a storm. That's a long time. And you don't, there may be a few people that could, but in those conditions, you can't keep food down. Calm down enough, boys, you better have something to eat. Therefore, I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. And there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. So he tells them again the same thing God told him, that Jesus told him just a little bit earlier. You're going to have, everybody's going to make it. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then were they of good cheer, and they took some meat. Maybe Paul knows what he's talking about. Maybe things are going to be okay. And we were in all in the ship 216 souls, 276 people. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. I don't know if that was their cargo that hadn't been cast out yet. I don't know. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. That looks like a good place to beach this thing. And when they had taken up anchors and committed themselves to the sea, and loosed the rudder bands and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, wind must have been in the right direction to take them that way, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas meet, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broke with the violence of the waves. Remember he said earlier, verse 22, now I exhort you to be of good cheer. There shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. The ship isn't going to make it. The hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves, and the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners. Remember, we're still under Roman rule, and if your prisoner escapes, who's responsible? Whoever's supposed to be guarding them. So that's actually, for a Roman soldier, that's a sensible response. Soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But this centurion's been with Paul now for a while. He's listening to what Paul said. He actually gave him that first couple verses there when they were in Sidon, and he gave him liberty to go into his friends and to refresh him. Centurion saw something in Paul. I'm not going to say he was or was not a believer, but he did some kind of unusual things regarding Paul. But the centurion, verse 43, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose. No, guys, we're not going to do that. And commanded that they which could swim, should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on board, some on broken pieces of ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. Well, that's quite a trip they took. And they're not done yet, but as far as the bad weather goes, if you signed up for that cruise, you'd want your money back. I think it's pretty safe to say that. So they all escaped on the land, and next chapter, verse 1. And when they were escaped, and they knew that the island was called Melita, the modern day term for that is Malta. I think a lot of people have heard of that. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us, every one, because of the present rain and because of the cold. Barbarous. Down in verse 4, they're called barbarians. And when we think of barbarians, we think of, at least I do, and I've been trained by what I've seen, which is TV shows, movies, and very, very few books. When you think of a barbarian, you think of someone who's not civilized, but use your own imagination. But it means, where did I write it down at? Maybe I didn't write it down. I should have. Sorry about that. Anyway, it means a foreigner or a non-Greek. Doesn't mean they were backwoods, whatever term you want to use, but they were, to the people on that ship, they would have been foreigners. How good of communications they might have had, language barriers, I don't know, we're not told. But these were foreigners to the people on the ship. They were on Malta, which is their home now, but they were looking at them as foreigners. We do the same thing. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness. They weren't headhunters or cannibals or what, the kind of things you might think of as a barbarian. They were kind to them, for they kindled a fire and received us, everyone, because of the present rain and because of the cold. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hand. Give me just a second. This is what I was going to point out. From the time they left Crete, sailing through this storm when they were just taken of the wind, ended up on the island of Malta. We were told a few verses before it was 14 days. It's a long storm, long time to be out in those conditions, especially back then. But just the Isle of Malta, if you picture where Crete's at, Malta is clear over just south of Sicily. It's about 600 miles from Crete. So in 14 days, the wind took them through a storm 600 miles. That's pretty incredible. And that's a lot to go through, but God told them they were going to make it, and they did. All right, verse 3. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat, fastened on his hand. And when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he had escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffered not to live." And they have some reason to think that way. They more than likely knew that however many of the prisoners were prisoners, there were soldiers there, there was a centurion. And when one of the prisoners got bit by the viper, that's the assumption they made. I'm not saying that was a good assumption, but there's some reason they made that. And he shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. Howbeit, they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead suddenly, but after they had looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they went from saying, "You're getting just exactly what you deserve," to saying they changed their minds and said he was a god. That's a big swing. And I know people, we all have, I have, we make hasty decisions and jump to conclusions, but they went from one side of the spectrum clear to the other, just because of that snake that didn't harm Paul. In the same quarters were possessions of the chief man of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and lodged us 3 days courteously. Again, remember, they're called barbarians, but it's not what we would think of. Let me rephrase that. What I would think of, what I've been trained to think of as a barbarian, would not have responded that way. They were just foreigners from a different place. Lodged us 3 days courteously. And it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and of a bloody flux, to whom Paul entered in and prayed, laid his hands on him and healed him. And when this was done, others also which had diseases in the island came and were healed, who also honored us with many honors. And when we departed, they laded us with such things as were necessary. And this is probably not the best place, but it's going through my mind. Remember, the centurion is watching all of this happen. From the time they left Caesarea, He's watching all the things Paul's done, watching how God's used him, watching how he warned him about what was going to happen. He's taken note of all this. He has to be. He's in charge of the whole operation. So they honored us with many honors, and when we departed, they laded us with such things as were necessary. Again, they treated him with kindness. They were foreigners, but they were friendly towards them. And after 3 months, now just reading through that, you wouldn't think they'd spent 3 months on Malta, but they did. After 3 months, we departed in a ship of Alexandria, which had wintered in the isle, whose sign was Castor and Pollux. I tried to find something on that. I didn't try real hard, but what I did find is the old wooden ships had a figurehead carved on them. You see it in some of the old movies. I don't know how accurate they are. This particular ship apparently had 2 of them. I don't know if that meant something in particular or not. That's all we're told. It identifies the ship. Today, if you go anywhere where there's bigger boats, they've all got a name written across the back of them, right? Whatever the owner determines to call that ship. I'll tell you, why not? Remember the old steel rowboats? They were about 10 feet long and they weighed a ton and you had to wrestle them around, flat bottom. Probably not too many of you remember them. I had one years and years and years ago. I'd drag it up in the truck and take it to the lake and go out bluegill fishing once in a while. Just had oars in it, didn't have a motor in it. And I had this goofy idea, I got to name this boat. So what? Anybody want to take a guess at what I named that? At the time, it was probably 40 years old. Old steel rowboat that nobody had anything like that anymore except me. What do you think I named it? What? SS Minnow. No? I actually thought I was pretty clever. Poor man's pleasure. I got a lot of laughs from people going by looking at that. But I liked to fish back then, so it was poor man's pleasure. Now I ran my mouth too much and lost my spot again. Okay, verse 11. After 3 months we departed in a ship of Alexandrian, which had wintered in the isle, whose sign, meaning the figurehead, 2 of them was Castor and Pollux. And landing at Syracuse. Now, we're starting to close in on our destination. Left Caesarea. I didn't figure how far the whole trip was, but so far it's all been by boat in pretty adverse conditions the majority of the time. Landing at Syracuse, that is a city on the coast of Sicily, which is a big, huge island right at the southern tip of Italy. We tarried there 3 days, and from thence we fetched a compass and came to Rhegium. That's still on Sicily. Or no, this is on the mainland of Italy now, which isn't far at all from Sicily. And after 1 day, the south wind blew, and we came the next day to Puteoli. Now they're on mainland Italy. And the centurion who was given the responsibility of delivering these prisoners to Rome, and all they have been through, and probably everybody on the ship is probably thinking, Paul might have been right, we might actually make it. Because this is where they get off the boat. Now it's land travel from here on. Where we found brethren and were desired to tarry with them 7 days, and so we went toward Rome. And from thence, when the brethren heard of us, they came to meet us as far as Appiaphorum, and the 3 taverns, whom when Paul saw, he thanked God and took courage. Today we think of a tavern more like a bar in a small town, or not necessarily a small town, but taverns back then were inns, and apparently there were 3 of them, and it was a place that was known for hospitality. Not anything in the Bible said about it. That's just something I dug up. It's not a big deal one way or the other. But verse 16, and when we came to Rome, the centurion delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard, but Paul was suffered or allowed to dwell by himself with a soldier that kept him. Again, back to the centurion. Back up in verse 14. Paul's a prisoner, right? And we're not told anything about the rest of the prisoners, but the soldiers and the centurion's responsibility was to deliver them to Rome. Verse 14 says, where we found, this is still in Petulii, or however you pronounce that, where we found brethren and desired to tarry with them 7 days. The centurion had no reason, no soldier reason, if that makes any sense, to allow that to happen. I think it was out of respect for Paul, and I may be wrong, but it's just unusual that they did that, and so they went to Rome. But go back to chapter 27, verse 3 again. We already read this. The next day we touched in Sidon, and Julius, who's the centurion, courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. So this centurion, I'd like, just me, I'd like to know where that centurion's at right now. We know Paul, we're not told through this trip very little, but you know Paul was preaching Christ to him every opportunity he got. And because of the way that centurion treated him, he still had a responsibility as a soldier to deliver him. But the way he treated Paul, I suspect we may see him someday. That's just me. We'll know. So again, verse 16, and when we came to Rome, the centurion delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard, but Paul, who was also a prisoner, was allowed to dwell by himself with the soldier that kept him. And it came to pass that after 3 days, Paul called the chief of the Jews together. And when they were come together, he said unto them, men and brethren, though I have committed nothing against the people or customs of our fathers, yet was I delivered prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans, who when they had examined me, would have let me go, because there was no cause of death in me. Now think back what we've read through the last few chapters. First, the chief captain came when the big outbreak happened. Chief captain took him to Felix, the governor in Caesarea. When Felix left office, Festus came in, the new governor. Festus examined him. He called in King Herod Agrippa II. Covered that a week or two ago. Agrippa examined him. And Agrippa, the last statement we have out of Agrippa, we already looked at it earlier today, then said You don't have to turn back here, but it's the last verse in chapter 26. Then said Agrippa unto Festus, this man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar. So everything Paul says, it just lines up. He says, would have let me go because there was no cause of death in me. Back in 28 now, I'm sorry, verse 19. But when the Jews spake against it, I was constrained to appeal unto Caesar. Not that I had aught to accuse my nation of. For this cause, therefore, have I called for you, to see you and to speak with you, because that for the hope of Israel I am bound with this chain. And they said unto him, we neither received letters out of Judea concerning thee, neither any of the brethren that came showed or spake any harm of thee. In other words, you arriving here in person is the first time we've heard of any of this. Well, it kind of makes sense. They jumped on a boat and headed towards Rome. Word had not traveled to them yet concerning Paul. Verse 22. But we desire to hear thee what thou thinkest. For as concerning this sect, we know that everywhere it is spoken evil against. The word sect, it appears several times in the book of Acts, and I think we kind of skipped over it. But it means a group or party. And I don't mean a party like a birthday party, but more on the line of a political party. One political party, they group up and form a sect because they believe this. Another political party, you understand what I'm saying. Not saying good or bad. We're not opening that up. Ain't no way. But that's called a sect. There are religious sects. People that believe one way end up gathering together, and whether they're right or wrong isn't the issue. But people that think the same way end up gathering together normally. Concerning this sect, the Christian sect, we know that everywhere it is evil, it is spoken. Let me read it instead of trying to guess. We know that everywhere it is spoken against. The gospel's traveling around the world, and it's spreading like a fire, but it's still the minority of people. Still spoken evil. How's it spoken of today in most places around the world? Not well. It doesn't change. It doesn't change. And when they had appointed him a day, there came many to him into his lodging. Paul had a lot of freedom for a prisoner because of the centurion, I believe. Many came into his lodging, to whom he expounded and testified the kingdom of God, persuading them concerning Jesus, both out of the law of Moses and out of the prophets, from morning till evening. Paul has not changed his message one bit from the time he heard the voice and saw the light, heard the voice of Jesus, saw the light on the road to Damascus. His message hasn't changed a bit. He goes back and shows out of the Old Testament scriptures how it foretold, prophesied about Jesus. He's still doing the same thing here in Rome. It hasn't changed. And the reaction hasn't changed. Verse 24, and some believed the things which were spoken, and some believed not. And when they had agreed not among themselves, they departed after that Paul had spoken one word. Well spake the Holy Ghost by Isaiah the prophet unto our fathers. Remember, he's using the Old Testament to show them who Christ is. Now he's going to use it to show them who they are. Well spake the Holy Ghost by Isaiah. Just a side point. What does that confirm when it says, well spake the Holy Ghost by Isaiah. What does that confirm? I hope everybody understands this. Mandy?
I said the Holy Ghost was present in the Old Testament.
Not only present, but inspired Isaiah to write it. Yep, you're right. Those little things just dotted here and there throughout the Bible just confirms we can trust this book. God wrote it. Maybe not with his hand, but he worked and inspired people what to write, told them what to write, and it's, I could go on longer than I should. This book has survived a lot, but it was given to us by God, and it ain't going nowhere. It ain't going nowhere. Here's what Isaiah said. Well spake the Holy Ghost by Isaiah the prophet unto our fathers, saying, in verse 26, go unto this people and say, I don't remember when Isaiah was written, but it was a long time before where we're at right here in Acts. And now we're 2,000 years past this. But look what Isaiah says. Go unto this people and say, hearing ye shall hear and shall not understand. And seeing ye shall see and not perceive. For the heart of this people is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes have they closed, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and should be converted, and I should heal them. That same thing's going on today everywhere we look. I think it's in Romans. It says they were willingly ignorant. And for years, I was willingly ignorant. Didn't want to hear it, don't want to see it, don't want to hear about it, don't tell me about it. I'm closing my eyes, I'm closing my ears. But when we don't, when we allow God to work in our lives, the last part of verse 27, we can understand with our heart and can be converted. Praise God that every one of us is here today, trusting in Christ as their Savior. That's something to be mighty thankful for, because the majority of the world has shut it off from the time of Isaiah, from before Isaiah, through the book of Acts, up till today, and it isn't going to change. Be it known, therefore, unto you, that the salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles, and that they will hear it. Not all of them, but there's going to be, Paul's telling them 2,000 years ago, and that's been his message as he traveled them first 3 journeys into Asia, what we would call Turkey, Greece. The Gentiles are going to listen. And I've said this before. Look around this room at the Gentiles. That 2,000 years ago, Paul was used of God to take the message of Christ to our ancestors, and some of them believed. And because of that, we're here today. Not that I'm saying being here this one spot, it is special, but this is going on all over the world today. We're not unique. But if it wasn't for Paul, and especially if it wasn't for Jesus and God's whole plan that all this would happen 2,000 years ago, where would we be right now as individuals? I can't answer that. But it probably wouldn't be good. Verse 28 again, be it known therefore unto you that the salvation of God, I like it says the salvation. How many salvations are there? One. And who's it from? God. The salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles that they will hear it. And here we are today because of that. And when and when he had said these words, the Jews departed and had great reasoning among themselves. Remember, back up in a couple verses back, verse 25. And when they agreed not among themselves, they departed. I guess verse 24. And some believed the things which were spoken, and some believed not. But they departed, verse 29, they departed and had great reasoning among themselves. But they reasoned with each other. And I think the ones that believed and the ones that didn't, and I don't know out of all that, how long that happened, we're not given any details. But they great reasoning among themselves. This is something new. Let's figure this out. Is Paul right or isn't he? Were the Old Testament scriptures right or weren't they? It's a good conversation to have. And Paul dwelt 2 whole years in his own hired house and received all that came into him. The amount of freedom he had, it's incredible. Preaching the kingdom of God and teaching those things which concern the Lord Jesus Christ, just like he always has since the time he got saved, with all confidence, no man forbidding him. God's ways are way, way above our ways. And I'm not saying this because I have any kind of wisdom at all. I'm not claiming that at all. I'm claiming God's wisdom is so much better than my wisdom. If I was God, that's not where I would have stopped the book of Acts. I would have told us what happened. He chose not to. He's God. Every time I read through this over the years, I get to the end of it and I said, man, I wish there was one more chapter. But there's not. And that's okay, because that's what God gave us. Anyway, we need to close. Got to come up with another plan now, don't I? We finished Acts. I don't know where I'm going next. Kicking a few things around. I'll get it figured out in the next day or so. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Just thank you for all the things you've done throughout history to sometimes force the gospel to travel to different places. Thank you for those that believed and passed it on, and the next generation that believed and passed it on and on we go till we get to 2024 and we're sitting here. It's our turn. Lord, I pray that you would use us, however you see fit. I was going to say like you used Paul, but however you see fit. You use each one of us in different ways. Just pray that your will will be done in our lives, and we thank you again for your salvation. In Jesus' name, amen.